Welcome back, folks, to another episode of Patriot Network TV. It is an honor and a privilege to have with us today retired U.S. Navy Captain Larry Bailey. Captain Bailey served 27 years as a Navy SEAL, and he served in such places as Vietnam, the Philippines, Bolivia, Colombia, Panama, and Scotland. He is an expert on many things, but one of the things he is an expert on that I think is critically important to what we want to discuss today is the nominee to be the Secretary. Is Kerry going to be Secretary of Defense? Is that what's happening, Captain Bailey? Are they going to make him Secretary of Defense or Secretary of State? What are they going to do with him?
He's been nominated to be Secretary of State. It was rumored he was going to be nominated for Secretary of Defense, but I think they thought that might be overreaching a little bit, even in Obama's case.
Tell us about your personal experience, your personal knowledge of John Kerry and his service to the United States in South Vietnam.
Sure. Now, when I say my personal knowledge, I have to say that I have eyewitness accounts of everything I'm talking about here, but he's a phony, he's a liar, he's a cheat, and that's probably why he would make a good Secretary of State, because diplomats have to be able to look in the face and eye and to dissemble and to cause you to go in wrong directions. But his Silver Star, nobody ever knew who first wrote it up. Well, he wrote it up. It was phony, the $3 bill, and his three parts are phony as well. There's a doctor who was a Navy surgeon and Navy physician in Vietnam, and he told me personally to my face. His name is Louis Lefson, lives down in Yazoo City, Alabama, I believe it is, or Mississippi, wherever. And he said that Kerry came up to him one morning and had a little nick in his arm, and came up for a Purple Heart. And why? And so a tiny little piece of spring shrapnel that had come out of an M40 grenade that Kerry had shot himself with. All three of his wounds were self-inflicted, and there were eyewitnesses to all 12 incidents. And the reason he wanted 3 Purple Hearts was because if you got 3 Purple Hearts, you got to go home early. He was only in Vietnam for 3 months, and I was very closely associated with the Swift Boat guys in 2004, and I learned more about John Kerry than anybody ever thought they would want to know. But he's a liar. He's a left-wing demagogue. He tries to pretend he's an Irishman, and he has no Irish blood in his background at all. I think his father changed his name, but he's just a phony all the way around.
Now,
so if you want to know anything else about John Kerry, maybe you don't want to ask me, because I'll give you more than you want.
One of the things that I'd like to focus on here for a second is most of our viewers are either active or retired duty service folks, but some of them don't know what the requirement is for a Purple Heart. And a Purple Heart dates back to George Washington. George Washington's visage is on the medal, and it is an honor for someone who has been wounded in combat. And if you could speak a little bit to what the Purple Heart means to people who actually spent more than 90 days in Vietnam, as someone who served there and had to write the letters that went home to folks who'd been killed in duty and actually earned their Purple Heart, could you kind of outline that difference between what a Purple Heart was for the average recipient of a Purple Heart in Vietnam versus Mr. Kerry's Purple Hearts?
I was technically eligible for a Purple Heart one time, but there was some question as to whether I shot myself or somebody else shot me. So I wouldn't even hear of being put in for it. And but I would say that none of my guys ever got wounded, and not in combat. And so maybe a couple of bar fights, but anyway, anybody who got a Purple Heart in combat probably went through a severe thought process that said, boy, I could have died. And they realized just what that price was that they had signed up to be willing to pay, if you understand what I'm talking about here. But if you got a Purple Heart due to enemy action, you realize that this is not a game. I'm in here for the long haul. I've signed a contract to support the Constitution. This is what it means. So I guess that's as short a definition as I can give of what the Purple Heart's all about.
So part of the reason that you demonstrate what I think is totally justifiable animus toward John Kerry is that he has disgraced a part of the military tradition that you hold very dear. The idea that he would manipulate the awarding of those medals, get 3 of them so he could get out early and then come back and tell stories that were false about other men who served honorably. The whole of his resume vis-a-vis his service in Vietnam just rankles you. It's just it's an affront to you, to the people you served with, and to the 58,000 names on that wall there in Washington, isn't it?
That's absolutely, it is an insult. And you know what? We continue to insult ourselves by not getting a little bit more riled up about it, because there are people who were over there that just say, "Oh heck, that's just par for the course for a left winger." It's not just par for the course; it's treason to the country and disobedience to the Constitution, which we swore to uphold. And I get kind of frothed at the mouth when thinking about John Kerry, but then again, I don't go pounding on the door of the Senate office building demanding to go see him so I could knock his head off or do other physical harm to him. He's not accountable. None of the liberals are accountable. Chuck Hagel, same way. He makes some outrageous statements about Israel and what have you. And I'm not an expert on Chuck Hagel, but I do know he is not the guy we want in as Secretary of Defense, because he does not have a strong military background. He may have a Silver Star as an enlisted guy in Vietnam. That's not what you're looking for in a Secretary of Defense. But your Durbin of Illinois, and so many of those northeastern liberals and the California liberals, they as far as I'm concerned, they should be put in a little camp of their own, because they're not patriotic Americans.
You know, one of the things on your resume, one of the lines on your resume is the campaign to sink Murtha. John Murtha, who always wrapped himself in his record in the Marine Corps, was not much of a friend to the U.S. military when he was in the Congress, was he?
Well, in the old days, he was. He was chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, and I know from personal experience that one of his staffers was able to give my command an extra $2.5 million, and it was a special operation, Naval Special Warfare Center out in California, and so he had a reputation as being pro-military, but he also was very pro-Murtha and very pro-22nd District of Pennsylvania. He was also a certifiable crook. In fact, when he died, he was under investigation by the FBI, and had an interview with. I have personally got a DVD that showed one of the scammers talking to trying to convince him to take a $50,000 bribe, and he basically said he would, but he wanted to wait till the next meeting. Before the next meeting happened, the FBI had to open had to slam shut the investigation, and they never got back to it. But he said that I think I'll take the money, something like that. And it's pretty clear that he was willing to be bought.
Well, the only thing, as I remember the 60 Minutes interview, the only thing he balked at was he didn't want 50, he wanted 100,000. It's the old George Bernard Shaw line where the Duchess of Windsor is asked, "Will you sleep with me for 500,000 pounds?" And she says, "Why, yes." And he says, "What about 50 quid?" And she goes, "What kind of woman do you think I am?" And he says, "We've determined that. We're just haggling on price now." I think everybody knew Murtha was for sale. The only question was, what was the price tag going to be? Captain Bailey, we got to take a break here for just a minute. We're going to come back and do part 2 of the interview, okay?
Okay, I'll stand by.
All righty, real good. We'll be right back, folks, and we'll have part 2 of the interview with Captain Bailey.